Okay, let's talk about the last topic, which is a little bit different from previous three ones. It's about South and North Korean economic cooperation. Professor, if you have chance to meet Chairman Kim Jong-un, and if he asks you what the North Korea have to do from now on, after the deal of the denuclearization between United States and North Korea, so what is your recommendation?
Well, first, one shouldn't give too much seriousness to anything that President Trump does. He's a very good television star, but not really very deep into the substance of the issues. And at least, the coverage in the United States was very clear. It was much better to have peace than war, but it was largely a problem that he created. He raised the tension, and then he lowered the tension. And how much credit you should give him for lowering a problem that he created is questionable. But it is clear that there may be steps going forward. The way I would put it first is that this sense of trying to have cooperation, get a peace agreement is an important step forward. The Korean War was a long time ago. The battle about communism is basically over. The West won that intellectual battle. And so, in some sense, I think the long run, we know who's going to win this battle. It's only a matter of time. So one shouldn't be stuck in the past of 80 years ago or so. I mean, that one should be moving forward. As part of that, you did have these attempts of free trade zones, zones of cooperation. I think one might begin by trying to bring those back. They had some problems in that period of tension. It might be good to try to see if one could interact economically in a slow way. A few years ago, I was here in Korea, and there was a lot of discussion about reunification. There was an optimism at that point. I didn't understand where it was coming from, and there was a lot of the question that was posed to me as an economist was how best to manage the reunification. And the example that we used at the time was it was German reunification. That was done not very well. They made some critical mistakes. The government just, and it shows making some very critical mistakes can lead to high unemployment. The problems that Germany faced in the mid-90s, I view as largely created by the wrong strategy for reunification. So the important lesson there is one has to do it very carefully. The exchange rate was a critical variable that they got wrong. So it's going to be a difficult issue, but I don't think that's an issue you're going to have to be facing for some time. And so now I think it's just to expand the space of cooperation.
Okay. Professor Hartz, do you like to share your experiences of separation and the reunification between West and East Germany?
Bei aller Kritik an Herrn Trump ist es aber richtig, wenn man miteinander redet, schießt man nicht aufeinander. Und als Deutscher kann ich sehr gut verstehen, dass die Südkoreaner von der Wiedervereinigung träumen, denn es ist eine unnatürliche Trennung. Und ich würde einen Masterplan machen, wie die Wiedervereinigung auf lange, lange Sicht aussehen wird. Wenn Sie mit einem Termin anstreben, werden Sie das gar nicht vielleicht erleben, weil es sind zu viele Unwägbarkeiten. In Deutschland war vorgeschaltet die Ostpolitik. Und ich glaube, die Schrittfolge, um diese vertrauensbildenden Maßnahmen zu machen, die könnten sehr wohl in einem ungefährlichen Bereich für Nordkorea erfolgen, zum Beispiel bei Nahrungsmitteln, was den Hunger angeht, dann in der Gesundheit, was Gesundheitsthemen angeht und vor allen Dingen auch im menschlichen Bereich, dass der Austausch, dass die Besuche wieder in Frage kommen, da sie nicht keinen Konflikt, keinen Krieg führen werden und wollen, wird man die politische Veränderung des Systems in Nordkorea abwarten müssen, wie sich das entsprechend verändert und mit welchen Schritten Nordkorea bereit ist, sich in einem ungefährlichen, in Anführungszeichen, in einem ungefährlichen wirtschaftlichen Bereich zu bewegen. Und vielleicht erleben Sie es, vielleicht erleben Sie es, Ihre Kinder. Ich habe die deutsche Wiedervereinigung miterlebt. Es war ein einmaliges Erlebnis. Es hat furchtbar viel Geld gekostet, aber das Geld war es wert. Wir hatten übrigens diese Projektsteuer, hatten wir eingeführt, die Ergänzungsangabe. Jetzt ist alles bezahlt. Jetzt müsste man sie eigentlich abschaffen. Und die Regierung müsste eigentlich so fair sein und sagen, für das Projekt war das gut, und jetzt können wir für das andere machen. Und dann muss man sehen, in diesen Schritten, wie eine Währung und wie das alles eingeführt werden kann. Ich bin sicher, eines Tages werden Sie die Wiedervereinigung haben und ich wünsche sie Ihnen.
Oh, Professor.
Yeah. If I can add a very modest compliment, one as a European and two as a citizen of a country which is also divided between North and South, but in a different way, namely Belgium. As a European, I mean, I'm still full of admiration about what was achieved through the European institutions, especially, of course, by France and Germany, after a butchery, I mean, a sort of total catastrophe that divided us, and namely the Second World War, which had nothing to envy to the Korean War in terms of number of deaths it's produced, and not just in Europe. And then something was done and looked initially very down to earth and pedestrian, sort of stealing coal and things like that. But then something that worked and of which we can see the result despite all the mistakes that were made, including related to our common currency. But there is something in Montesquieu's famous analysis of what produced lasting peace, which is le doux commerce, the mild commerce, and so trade between, and gradually you get that, it intensifies, it doesn't make violence impossible, but it really reduces its probability, because that's the way in which interests prevail over passions, in famous phrase. But that's one thing. And the other thing, so I think commerce is not enough in order to establish this basis, and the Belgian experience is very different. We have one state with common institutions, but we have two languages. And gradually, as the two languages were recognized on the same footing, you had a development of two parallel democracies. People stopped talking to each other, being able to talk to each other across the linguistic border. And what needs sort of part of an effort to do that, and English is an important part, as English is becoming the most widespread language in the country. So we need to reform a common demos, so that beyond the interests that you can sort of mobilize through trade and commerce, it's important to intensify discussions. Of course, it will be first among the academia, intellectuals, etc., but schools, etc., and gradually you have to build up this sort of trust, which in our country is lacking, but you have the great advantage of speaking the same language, North and South. Exploit and mobilize that tremendous asset, as the Germans did.
Okay, thank you. Professor Deaton, you emphasized very much on the healthcare and education. So in terms of healthcare and education, probably, in my opinion, it will be very important for South Korea or the world to help out the improvement to improve those Koreans' health and better education. So, what is your thought on the importance of that kind of cooperation between South and North
I
Korea?
think it's potentially enormously important. I become very worried in thinking about these issues. I'm old enough to have been through several of these convulsions, like with the fall of the Soviet Union, for instance. And I remember there was a whole branch of economics called transition economics at around that time. And almost everything that was said at that time was nonsense. We were very bad about thinking about it. And it's partly because I agree with almost everything that's said about doing things slowly and gradually, because that's almost the only sensible way to do it. But the way these events tend to turn out tends to be that you don't have the time for that to happen, and things happen very quickly in political space, and these trains are very hard to stop once they're running. So I still think there's an enormous amount of danger ahead, though like everybody else, I'm enormously encouraged by your new president and the new government that's focusing on this sort of policy. I also come from a country that's divided by North and South. I'm a Scotsman, and they keep trying to break off with the people in the South. And I think that would be a disaster. I mean, I think, when Scotland and England joined in 1707, having been separate countries, that was what gave us Adam Smith and gave us the Scottish Enlightenment and so on, because it suddenly opened up the world to the Scots in a way that had not been open before. And I don't think Adam Smith would have ever written The Wealth of Nations had Scotland not become a major trading country and spent a lot of time in Europe and so on. So maybe that's one of the stories that you have to tell the authorities in the North, and the great benefits to both Scotland and the world that came from integrating with England 300 and so years ago, 350 years ago.
Thank you. I really hate to say this, but time is almost up, so I guess I have to open the floor discussion or question. So we don't have a lot of time, so I'll take only 2 questions. Yes. 마이크 좀 저기 두 분. 네, 저기 질문은 그냥 하셔도 통역을 하니까. I think they're gonna speak in Korean, so please use your
존경하는
translator.
스티글리츠 교수님하고 디튼 교수님께 질문드리겠습니다. 한국 경제는 해외 의존도가 매우 높고 한국 기업들은 세계 시장에서 치열하게 경쟁하고 있습니다. 이러한 상황에서 한국 정부가 불평등 해소를 위해서 개입을 확대할 경우에 세계 시장에서 경쟁하는 한국 기업의 원가가 높아지고 경쟁력도 낮아지고, 그럴 경우 나아가서 기업 규모나 고용 규모도 줄어들게 되고, 그렇게 될 경우 불평등 해소에 오히려 역행할 가능성이 있다는 지적이나 우려도 있습니다. 이러한 지적이나 우려에 대한 두 분의 생각을 듣고 싶습니다. 감사합니다.
Okay, this is for Professor Stiglitz and Deaton. So.
Yeah, I'm not very worried about that. First of all, competitiveness is determined mostly by exchange rates. And the exchange rate, we would say, will adjust and ensure that you remain competitive. But secondly, the agenda that we've talked about of increasing equality actually increases productivity. A lot of the things we've talked about is more equal access to education, better health, better access to health, shorter hours. All of these lead to more productive labor force. In the United States, when we reduced the number of hours worked, it actually significantly increased productivity and that lowered costs. So to me, the equality agenda is actually one that will increase productivity and increase competitiveness.
I think you want to worry about the other way around. I mean, it's not so much the effect of Korean domestic policy on international events, but on the international monetary system and excessive financial flows which can take place on restoring and preserving Korea's freedom to act domestically, which has happened in many countries in Europe over the last 10 years.
And happened in Korea when there was pressure
1997,
to open up the capital market prematurely and without the right structures.
Yeah. Okay. Second question.
예, 오늘 아침부터 강의해 주셔서 감사합니다. 예, 멋진 강의 들어서 감사드리고 오전서부터 얘기해 주셨던 강의 중에 테이커를 통해서 불평등은 이제 뭐 복지와 기본소득 지금 다양한 도전들이 이루어지고 있는데 또 하나의 측면에 혁신을 통해서 부가 창출하면서 두 분 다 앞에 교수님께서 얘기하셨는데 부가 창출이 되면서 불평등이 발생할 수도 있다고 얘기를 해주셨습니다. 만약에 슌페터식 창조적 파괴를 통해 기업 간의 경쟁 노동자 간의 경쟁이 놓이게 되는 상황이 되는데 다만 기업은 미래 비즈니스에 대해서 먼저 고민하고 학습하고 도전합니다. 그러나 노동자나 기존의 노동조합이나 근로자들은 이런 것에 뒤따라가게 되면서 시간의 격차가 발생됩니다. 따라서 기업이 혁신을 주도하고 있는데 노동조합이나 대학 교육을 지금 두 분께서 교수님께서 말씀해 주신 것이 혁신을 쫓아가지 못하는 경우가 많이 발생하고 있습니다. 지식이나 경험, 비즈니스에 대한 모델들이 사회보다 늦춰지게 되는데 과연 대학 교육과 노동조합을 중심으로 한 지금 이런 불평등에 대한 접근 방식이 맞는 건지 또 새로운 기업은 새로운 비즈니스, 새로운 노동자를 원하게 되는데 이런 부분에 있어서 기존의 노조와 대학 교육 문제를 과거의 방식으로 격차에 대한 문제, 교육에 대한 매칭 이런 걸로 과연 일자리 문제가 많이 해결될 수 있는 건지 그 부분에 대해서 조금 테이커 중심의 불평등에 대해서 얘기를 들었다면 메이커 중심의 불평등에 대해서 좀 의견을 패널 분들 중에서 좀 의견을 듣고 싶습니다.
Okay, I think Professor Deaton,
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said something. I think we've been a little too positive today in talking about unions. And there are downsides to unions too, one of which you've raised. And also for someone like me who thinks of inequality in terms of rent seeking, unions are dangerous territories because unions are rent seekers too. And the reason I worry so much about the destruction of unions now is simply because we've sort of got rid of the unions and the only rent seekers are on the other side, the corporate rent seekers. And so the rent seeking is not balanced in the way it was before. And the old equilibrium, what I think it was Bob Solow who first called the Treaty of Detroit, that we'll make lousy cars, we'll keep out all sorts of imports, we won't innovate very much, and we'll split the profits with you guys, sort of worked pretty well until the world opened up and then it became impossible to do it anymore. So I think the issue you've identified is a real one, that unions can be in the balance difficult towards innovation. But then so can monopoly. One of the things we haven't really talked about is the extent to which monopolists don't need to innovate because they've got no competition to bother about, which stimulates innovation. So, I mean, that's another part of this thing. And education, as you said, is very important too. People have to realize and come to understand that Schumpeterian innovation in the end is what makes all of our lives better. And they have to look far enough into the future to understand that that's the case. And I don't think that's impossible either. And maybe a UBI would really help in that consideration too.
Yeah, but I think what you've pointed out is that for a society to manage innovation and transition requires lots of things. It requires strong systems of social protection because, as I said before, if you don't have the system of social protection, you worry about losing your job, and the natural response to worrying about it is to stop it. And you use whatever you can do, collective action and part of unions. But Sweden and Norway are among the most unionized countries in the world, and yet they are among the most innovative. Why is that? Well, they have a social contract. They have a social contract in which there is an understanding that society as a whole will provide the social protection that you need in the face of very fast change. As I mentioned in my talk, the reason that they did this is they realized that if there are small countries and they were open, but they wanted to be dynamic, it would involve lots of change, and people would be losing their jobs, and that the only way to get everybody on board was to provide that social protection. But then they have several other pieces. An education system that actually works, and an active labor market policy that matches, that trains individuals for jobs that exist. Strong macroeconomic policies that keep the economy near full employment almost all the time. They've had a few episodes, but when they have, they've adjusted and they got back to full employment. So there's a panoply of policies that have enabled the Scandinavian Nordic countries to remain innovative, and yet to make sure that the people who are displaced don't go down the drain, but are actually protected. And that makes the whole society more open. And that is what I think keeps the unions from being resistant to change, but actually puts them on the side of change. And when Mr. Hartz talked about the system of co-determination in Germany is another way in which you can do that. In co-determination, they realize if they increase the productivity of the firm by various changes, they'll be protected in one way or another. So there are different institutional arrangements by which you can do this, but what is not a good, what is happening in the United States is, in some ways, I think the capitalists, the corporations, like it that there is high unemployment and stress, because that weakens bargaining power, that drives down the wages, and in a short-sighted way increase their profits and led to greater inequality. So you look at the trade agreements, you look at the investment agreements, part of the trade agreements, they were all designed to weaken the bargaining power of workers and create more inequality and more profits. But if you create this framework that we're talking about that provides greater security of workers, greater bargaining power, and the universal basic income is part of that, then you get a much greater receptivity to innovation and change.
Professor Parijs?
Yeah, two short points. One is, I said there is union and union. There are a number of countries in Europe where you have trade union federations that are very inclusive, where even they have a significant membership consisting of unemployed people, where part-time workers are a significant part. And of course, those trade unions, if they manage to work together sufficiently without giving too much power to the sectoral trade unions in the strong sectors, those can be really forces of progress and not just protectors of rents sort of concentrated in some sectors. And the second thing, which is to me very important and related to Angus's insistence on rent. Herbert Simon, one of you noble colleagues, once wrote, you know, when I think about what part of the income of my fellow countrymen, American, is due to their own efforts, rather than to the wonderful circumstances, historically exceptional circumstances in which they are. If I say 10%, I'm being generous. And that means that, in fact, most of what is incorporated in our salaries, including the fat salaries we on the stage have been earning, is not due to our working so much harder than Adam Smith or anything else, or anyone else, but simply due to all the technical innovations, to all the capital accumulation, the know-how incorporated in our societies, that has nothing to do with our efforts. And so trade unions that recognize that should be a bit less indignant about the fact that some of their income is not taking the form of social insurance only for them, but is taking the form of a more universalistic protection of everyone, through education, through healthcare for everyone, not just for the workers, and also through a basic income protection of some sort. And I think this illusion, fed also by the Marxist idea that all value comes from labor, from current labor, that this illusion is very powerful in motivating then this sometimes a very regressive conservative attitude of some trade unions. So let's share this rent far more equally. Sometimes trade unions are a great help, essential help against everything being taken by the capitalists, but sometimes some of them certainly work against that.
Okay, professors.
Nur ein Satz. Ein guter Chef wird in Zukunft auch durch die Digitalisierung mehr und mehr seine Mitarbeiter einsetzen. Und wenn diese Mitarbeiter sich dann eine Gewerkschaft wählen, ist das ihre Sache, weil die Mitarbeiter, die stellen das Ideenmanagement dar. Früher war das betriebliche Vorschlagswesen, jetzt wird das ausgebaut in einem modernen Unternehmen zum Ideenmanagement. Und der Besitzer und die Führung eines Unternehmens ist sehr gut beraten, die Ideen der gesamten Belegschaft aufzunehmen und sie mitführen zu lassen, sie Co-Manager sein zu lassen.
Thank you. I really hate to say this, but it's almost 5:45. So I think we have to wrap up the panel discussion. It was really unusual and special. You haven't seen anything like this, four distinguished scholars has heated discussions in the context of Korea. So I really appreciate your participation in this panel data and well preparation and very passionate discussions. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
네, 긴 시간 동안 함께해 주신 패널분들 그리고 교수님께 감사의 박수 다시 한번 부탁드립니다. 네, 여러분의 뜨거운 관심으로 함께한 경향포럼에 준비된 세션이 모두 마무리됐습니다. 오랜 시간 함께해 주신 분들께 다시 한번 깊이 감사의 말씀 드립니다.